Hi guys, welcome to the second part in the How to Use Melodyne series, where we'll be learning about how to manipulate the pitch of vocals for corrective purposes. So everyone knows that the key to a great sounding vocal that has been corrected is one in which the correction is not obvious to the listener. With the improvements in algorithms these days, we have the tools to do just that. One in particular is called Melodyne. So let's get started. Here I've got a part of a vocal line that I recorded as an a cappella. So I quickly made a scratch piano track with some strings to accompany it, so we have a reference for the pitch of the notes. I only had a couple of hours in the studio to get the vocal line done, so I had to record as many takes as possible and just work with the best one. So the first thing we need to do is open Melodyne as a VST on the same mixer channel that the vocals are on. If your vocals are split across multiple mixer channels, which can often be the case for larger projects, you can group those to one channel and just put your Melodyne on that, so it affects your whole vocal line. Otherwise, you'll need to open multiple instances of Melodyne, which will quickly eat away at your RAM space and put stress on your processor unnecessarily. Make sure you put your Melodyne VST at the very beginning of your inserts chain, so it doesn't record your reverb or delay. That really confuses pitch correction algorithms. We're using the VST version because we need to be able to monitor the vocals over the piano, whereas in the standalone application you can't do this, it's single track only. Make sure your FL playlist cursor is placed just before the vocal section, then go on your Melodyne VST and press transfer. Then press play on your timeline. Melodyne will now record your audio so you can edit it.
Temperature is rising and we both can't take the heat. Gone are all those days we swept each other off our feet. I love you for today. I can't predict tomorrow. That's how quickly our love changes. Oh, I know you walked away from us, but I'm still there. No, you didn't cry too much, but I still care. Just thought you'd know. Just thought you'd know I'm still your lady. You are still my baby. 'Cause love never dies, no matter how hard we fight. Between you and I am still your lady, baby.
When you're finished, just click stop on your FL transport controls and Melodyne will complete the recording and show you your analysed waveform. Also, the playback is slaved to your FL Studio, so you'll have to control your cursor from there, like such. So the first thing I would recommend doing here, because we have the magic of visual analysis, is make sure that your vocal notes are generally where they're supposed to be in terms of scale and relative pitch. So for example here, without even listening to it, we can tell the note is falling short of where it's supposed to be. The note is supposed to be centralized to B, but as you can see, it's slightly leaning towards C. So what we're going to do is shift this down slightly by using the pitch correction tool. Select your segment of audio, and then click on the Correct Pitch button here. There will be two options available to you here, pitch correction and pitch drift. For now, we're going to focus on pitch correction. We'll discuss pitch drift later. For the sake of this tutorial, I'm just going to correct all of the phrases at once here, because this is not a destructive process by any means, as the notes only need slight adjustments in order to align them to where they're supposed to be. Don't be afraid to use this method, even if it's just for investigative purposes to see where your vocals need to be pitch-wise. Now we can start fixing the vibrato of the notes where necessary.
Temperature is rising and we both can't take the heat.
Now, the first part I want to correct is here, where she says heat. The vibrato dynamic on this phrase is too wide.
Temperature can't take the heat.
What we need to do is flatten the vibrato slightly by using the modulation tool, found by right-clicking to bring up the menu, then left-clicking on Pitch Modulation tool. With the tool active, click and hold on your vocal note, and then move the mouse up to increase vibrato and down to decrease it. In this case, we want to decrease it, so we'll move down. We don't want it too flat, because that's how you end up with an auto-tune effect. So we want to flatten it to a point whereby the vibrato doesn't waver too far outside of the root note. Here I've brought the modulation value of the note down to about 32%. Okay, so now is where the time handle tool comes into play. I'm not happy with how the vibrato sounds, even though we have reduced its amplitude. The frequency of the vibrato doesn't quite match the frequency of the note. Sadly, we cannot increase the frequency of the vibrato or Melodyne per se, but we can, however, stretch or shrink the phrase to imitate just that. Obviously, by shrinking a phrase, you slightly increase the frequency of the vibrato, and by stretching it, you decrease it. Be very wary with this tool though. Overcooking it even slightly can make the correction sound super obvious and unnatural. This is a delicate tool that should be used in such a manner. Here I'm going to adjust the vibrato length very subtly to ever so slightly increase the frequency of the vibrato, just to make it sit more naturally within the note. So in order to stretch or shrink a phrase, you have to create a stretch point. To do this, with your time handle tool active, double-click on the exact area of your phrase you want to be the end of your stretching zone. This will now create a zone between the start of the phrase and your stretch point, which you can expand or collapse to change the characteristics of the section. Listen here to the effect it has on the sound when you stretch or shrink the phrase. Notice, however, the pitch trails off significantly towards the end of the phrase, which is why it still doesn't sound right. For instances like this, we can use our note separation tool to split the note and deal with the second part of the phrase individually. To do this, right-click to bring up the menu, then click on Note Separation tool. Find out where you want to separate the note. Where possible, always separate on a zero crossing where the vibrato is concerned. By that I mean where the vibrato crosses the very centre of the note. In our case, it's about here. Notice when you do this, it creates another note which follows where the pitch has gone. Just based on the visual analysis, we can already ascertain that it is out of pitch, so let's fix that too. Again, using our pitch correction tool, let's shift the note to where we want it to be. Here, the vibrato on the second part of the phrase looks and sounds good to me, so we won't change that as it'll affect the transition between the two parts of the phrase. It's very important to note at this point that this is exactly why correcting pitch of individual notes is more effective than applying a single pitch correction function to the whole audio file. That's why for a natural sounding result, Melodyne will beat auto-tune every time. So I'm just going to run through some parts of the vocal line in which the vibrato is very dynamic and attempt to fix it using the pitch modulation tool. So let's get to it.
Days we sweaty, temperature is rising, and we both can't take the heat. Gone are all those days we stay. Other off our feet. Gone are all those days we sweat each other off our feet. Gone are all those days we sweat each other off. We sweat each other. On all those days we sweat each other off our feet. I love you for today. I can't predict tomorrow. That's how quickly our love changes. I'm still I can't predict tomorrow. That's how quickly our love changes. Can't predict tomorrow, that's how quickly
Now, it's important to note that you want to try your best to align your vibratos in a manner whereby the equilibrium of the wavering pitch or vibrato is centralized to the note or phrase it is supposed to be on. Also remember, Melodyne is technically limited to the accuracy of the audio you are trying to correct. By this, I mean that it is the ultimate tool for turning a relatively good performance into an exceptional one, but just like any other pitch correction software, it cannot turn a terrible performance into anything more than T-Pain. In which case, you may as well have used Auto-Tune anyway. So let's move on to the formant. To put it briefly, the formant of a person's voice is effectively the fundamental frequency that their voice box generate when they vocalize. So this is different for everybody, as you can imagine, because it's crucially what makes different voices distinguishable from one another. The formant is identifiable by a spike in a particular section of the frequency range when a note is vocalized. This is called the resonant frequency of a voice. Because the resonant frequency in a sound is always the loudest one, it very much affects the pitch of the overall phrase note. The reason we need to look at formants is because the vibratos of a phrase can be misleading. A phrase with a very quick and dynamic vibrato can sound in pitch because it passes what we call the equilibrium, or in other words, the note that it's supposed to be centralized to, very often. So the human ear connects the dots and receives the average pitch, as it were. This is what I like to call the good enough syndrome. So the ear hears what sounds to be good enough based on the information the brain has put together and deemed it as in pitch. This is where a trained ear beats an amateur one every time. So let's activate the formant tool by right-clicking and then left-clicking on Formant tool. Once you activate this, you'll notice a bar appear in the center of your audio waveform segments. This is your formant frequency. This is the resonant or prominent frequency of each note that is displayed in front of you. What we want to do here is identify the uncorrected notes we are happy with and look at the formant to see if we need to change it. So when you have a note that is more or less in pitch and the vibrato sounds good, but the note still doesn't quite sit where it needs to be, formant is usually the tool you want to look at. By shifting the formant, we can change the resonant frequency of the note without significantly affecting overall pitch and vibrato. Using this method will make the vibrato sound a bit more natural. So I'm just going to run through and centralize some of these formants, and then we'll give it a final playback. Just like any vocal editing, you want to give it some natural leeway. So I'm only going to amend the formants of the notes that are misaligned by a significant amount. Sometimes the natural artifacts are what give a sound its character and charm, if you will. So you're probably wondering why I haven't mentioned the pitch drift tool. This is because this tool is only really necessary where drastic changes need to be made to the vibrato. What it attempts to do is reduce the dynamic range of the vibrato. It uses a method whereby it takes the highest peak and the lowest trough of the vibrato pitch and reduces them proportionately to each other. So in this case, we can't really reduce the range by much, as you can see here. That, however, is because the singer I used is quite well trained with pitch. If the vibrato was all over the place, then the pitch drift tool would be much more effective here. Now, as you may have seen, there's a multitude of other tools available to use here, but these are not commonly needed as they are basic tools which can mostly be found in your DAW too. The first tool we have but don't need here is the amplitude tool. Using this tool, you can change the volume of any particular phrase individually, which is handy for editing on the fly. It is, however, much more time-consuming than just compressing the audio, which is what I'll be doing, so I have no need for this tool. The second timing tool is the attack time tool. This does exactly what it says on the tin, allowing you to reduce the attack of any particular phrase, which is quite a unique tool. We have already used the note separation tool, so you know how that works. Make sure you use the note separation tool sparingly though. It's easy to fall down a rabbit hole and start separating every note when it isn't necessary. Remember the aim of the game. Keep it sounding natural.
Temperature is rising and we both can't take the heat. Gone are all those days we swept each other off our feet. I love you for today. I can't predict tomorrow. That's how quickly our love changes. Oh, I know you walked away from us, but I'm still there. No, you didn't cry too much, but I still care. Just thought you'd know. Just thought you'd know I'm still your lady. You are still my baby. 'Cause love never lies. No matter how hard we fight, between you and I am still your lady, baby.
Anyway, this now sounds fantastic, as you can hear. So I hope this has helped. So now that we've finished editing, if Melodyne seems to be taking up too much RAM or stressing your processor, you can record the corrected vocal line into a new audio file using Edison, and then delete your old Melodyne VST to resolve your performance issues. Do this by opening an Edison editor after the Melodyne in your insert chain. Make sure that there is no other processing before Edison, so move things like EQ and compression, reverb, delay below the Edison recorder before you start recording. Because if you don't, it will record your EQ and compression and delay and reverb and all that into your new audio file, and you won't be able to change that if you need to. When you're happy with your insert chain, on Edison, before you record, make sure that On Play is selected as your recording option, and then hit the record button. Then play the audio using your playlist transport controls. This will now record your finalized version of your audio.
Rising and we both can't take the heat. Gone are all those days we sweat.
So that's it, guys. Thank you for listening. And if there's any questions, as always, pop a comment below. But until next time.